He saw it, a flash of ink on the wrist of the young waitress clearing the table next to his. It wasn't the art itself that caught his eye, but the specific jagged shape of it. A coiled serpent with a single stylized fang. Time screeched to a halt. The diner's gentle hum faded into a roaring silence in his ears. His breath hitched. The spoon fell from his fingers, clattering onto the saucer with a sharp crack that broke no spell but his own. He couldn't look away. His gaze was locked on the young woman's arm as she moved, the tattoo disappearing and reappearing between a stack of plates. She felt his stare. A young black woman, probably in her early 20s, with bright, intelligent eyes that now narrowed with a flicker of unease. She pulled her sleeve down instinctively. Arthur didn't notice her discomfort. He was no longer in the Oakwood diner. He was in a humid, suffocating jungle, the air thick with the smell of mud and fear. He could feel the phantom weight of his rucksack, hear the ghost of a voice whispering beside him. "We carry this. We carry each other, Artie. It means we never leave anyone behind. Is there a problem here, sir?" The voice was sharp, laced with an artificial politeness that felt more like a weapon. A young man in a tight-fitting suit, a gold name tag proclaiming him Kyle Manager pinned to his lapel, stood over Arthur's table. He had the self-satisfied air of someone who wielded a little power and enjoyed it immensely. Arthur didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was a maelstrom of past and present, the image of the tattoo superimposed over the green canopy of a long-lost world. Kyle's smile tightened. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper. "You're making my staff uncomfortable. Whatever you're thinking, I suggest you stop. This is a respectable establishment." He cast a pointed, protective glance toward the waitress, Lena, who was now watching the exchange with a mixture of apprehension and embarrassment. The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. The implication was clear: a lecherous old man preying on a young woman. The nearby conversations began to falter as patrons turned to look. A bubble of silence was expanding from their table. Arthur finally pulled his gaze from the waitress, his eyes clouded with memory, focusing on the manager. "The 10 and 2, he managed to say, his voice a dry rasp. "Oh, I'm sure it's the tattoo," Kyle scoffed, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. He straightened up, puffing out his chest. He was performing now. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to pay your bill and leave." The injustice of it was a dull, familiar ache in Arthur's chest. He had been invisible for so long, a ghost in his own life. To be seen, but to be seen as this, it was a profound violation. He didn't have the words or the energy to fight. The shock of the tattoo had hollowed him out, leaving him with nothing but the ghosts of his platoon. He slowly reached for his wallet, his movements stiff and deliberate. Kyle watched him, a smug look of victory on his face. "That's right. Let's go, Grandpa. Time to move along." The patron's eyes were on him, a mixture of pity, suspicion, and morbid curiosity. They saw a frail, confused old man being reprimanded. They saw a young professional manager handling a delicate situation. The narrative was set, and Arthur was its villain. He fumbled with his wallet, his fingers clumsy. As he pulled out a $10 bill, a worn leather wristband he always wore slipped down his arm. It was dark with age, the leather cracked, but the small hand-tooled clasp was still intact. Kyle's eyes zeroed in on it. "What is that, some kind of souvenir from the good old days?" he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. He reached out as if to touch it. "Let me guess, bingo champion. 1985? Arthur flinched back, pulling his arm away, clutching the wristband with a sudden fierce protectiveness. The manager's casual mockery had struck a nerve deeper than any insult. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and monsoon rain. A young Arthur Finch, no older than 20, is huddled in a muddy foxhole. His hands are shaking, not from the cold but from the adrenaline of the firefight that just ended. Beside him, Sergeant Marcus Jones, his face etched with a strength that seems impossible for a man of 22, is wrapping the leather band around Arthur's wrist. "It was my father's," Marcus says, his voice a low rumble. "He said it keeps the luck in and the fear out. You need it more than me right now, Artie. You keep it. You bring it home." The memory was so vivid it stole Arthur's breath. That wristband wasn't a souvenir. It was a sacrament. It was the last physical piece he had of a man who had been more of a brother to him than his own blood. A man who had died 2 days later, pulling Arthur from a burning Huey. "I'm going to ask you one last time to leave," Kyle said, his patience all for show finally snapping. "Or my next call is to the authorities. They have ways of dealing with people who can't control themselves." The threat was the final humiliation. To be arrested, to be treated like a public nuisance, a deviant. The weight of it all was crushing. Arthur felt a profound weariness settle into his bones. Maybe Kyle was right. Maybe it was time to go. He had no fight left. He pushed himself up slowly, his joints protesting. But not everyone in the diner saw a pathetic old man. At a corner booth, a history professor named Dr. Arthur Finch, no relation, a fact he'd find ironic later, had been observing the entire scene. He was a regular, a man who noticed details. He'd seen the old man's initial shock, the way his eyes had locked on the tattoo, not with malice, but with a kind of shattering recognition. He'd heard the old man whisper something under his breath, a name that the wind of the past had almost carried away. Night Vipers. Alistair knew that name. It wasn't in the official textbooks. It was a phantom, a whisper in the dusty archives of military history, a legendary special operations unit from Vietnam, spoken of with a mixture of awe and reverence. A unit that had officially been wiped out, lost to the jungle. He watched the manager, Kyle, put a hand on the veteran's shoulder to physically escort him out. This was an injustice he could not witness in silence. There was a story here, a history being desecrated by a petty tyrant in a cheap suit. While Kyle's back was turned, gloating to the room, Alistair discreetly pulled out his phone. He had a contact, a former student who was now a public affairs officer at Fort Liberty. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. He typed a quick, urgent text message. Major, strange situation at the Oakwood Diner. Manager is harassing an elderly veteran. He seems disoriented, but I heard him mention a name, Night Vipers. The man's name might be Finch. Thought you should know. He hit send, his heart pounding. He had no idea if it would do any good, but he had lit a fuse. Now all he could do was wait and see if it reached the powder keg. For Arthur, time was running out. The audience in the diner, and the one watching this story, could now sense that the tables were about to turn. Justice was on the line, and the call had been made. Inside a sterile, fluorescent-lit office at Fort Liberty, hundreds of miles away, Major David Cole was finishing up a mountain of paperwork. His phone buzzed with the incoming text. He glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. Oakwood Diner? Harassment? It sounded like a local police matter. He was about to dismiss it when two words leaped off the screen. Night Vipers. Cole froze. His blood ran cold. It was a name that every Special Forces operator knew. They were a myth, a ghost story told to recruits to teach them the meaning of sacrifice. A unit that went into the darkest places of the Vietnam War and never came back. Officially, they never existed. Unofficially, they were legends. And the other name, Finch. Major Cole dropped his pen and turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard, accessing a deeply encrypted classified database that few people even knew existed. He typed in the two keywords, Night Vipers and Finch A. A single file appeared on the screen. It was flagged with the highest level of security classification. Finch, Arthur M., Captain 03. CO Project Night Viper. Status, KIA. Presumptive, 1971. But below that was a single appended note, added years later by a 4-star general who was now long retired. The note read, if contact is ever made, disregard status. The Ghost of Da Nang is to be considered an active duty command asset with full honors and immediate priority. This is not a request. Cole's breath caught in his throat. The Ghost of Da Nang. He was real, and he was in a diner, being harassed by a manager. He shot out of his chair so fast it slammed against the wall. He burst out of his office, yelling to his aide, get me General Matthews on the line. Tell him it's a Sentinel protocol. The ghost has surfaced. The aide, a young, competent lieutenant, stared back, utterly bewildered. A Sentinel protocol, sir? We've never run a Sentinel protocol. Well, we are running one today. Cole roared, his voice echoing through the quiet headquarters. And get me a transport detail. Now, tell them to bring dress uniforms, the best we have. The gears of the most powerful military in the world had begun to grind into motion, all because of a quiet old man in a diner. Back at the Oakwood, Kyle was feeling the full flush of his victory. The old man was defeated, shuffling toward the door. The crowd was on his side. He had restored order. He decided to press his advantage, to make this a lesson for anyone who might disrupt his perfect orderly kingdom in the future. And let this be a warning to you, Kyle announced, his voice puffed up with self-importance as he followed Arthur. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment. Next time, I won't be so understanding. We'll get you the help you clearly need, even if it means having you committed for an evaluation. He placed a firm, proprietary hand on Arthur's shoulder, ready to give him the final push out the door. Now get out. It was the ultimate overreach, the final arrogant shove that pushed him far beyond the point of any redemption. It was at that exact moment that the sound began. a low thrumming that quickly grew into a percussive chopping roar. It wasn't the sound of a city bus or a passing truck. It was the unmistakable sound of military helicopters. Then came the sirens, a chorus of them converging on the diner, not with the frantic wail of police cars, but the authoritative deep bellow of military police escorts. Outside the diner's large plate-glass windows, the world turned into a spectacle of flashing lights and disciplined motion. A convoy of sleek black government SUVs and 2 olive-drab Humvees screeched to a halt in the parking lot, forming a precise, intimidating perimeter. Doors flew open in unison. A dozen soldiers in crisp, immaculate dress uniforms disembarked, their movements sharp, economical, and utterly serious. They moved with a purpose that silenced every remaining murmur in the diner. The patrons, Kyle included, stared, their mouths agape. This wasn't police. This was something else entirely. The diner door swung open, and a man in the uniform of a 2-star general strode in, flanked by Major Cole. The general was a man carved from granite, his chest a billboard of valorous ribbons. His eyes, cold and sharp as chips of ice, scanned the room for a brief second before locking onto Arthur. He ignored Kyle, who still had his hand on Arthur's shoulder, and walked directly toward them. The soldiers formed a perfect honor guard behind him. The air in the room became thick, heavy, and sacred. The general stopped 3 feet in front of Arthur. For a moment he simply looked at the old man, his stern expression softening into one of profound, unadulterated respect. Then in the stunned silence of the diner he drew himself to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his hand to his brow in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. "Captain Finch," the general's voice boomed, resonating with an authority that left no room for doubt. "General Frank Matthews, it is an honor, sir." Arthur blinked, the fog of his memories finally parting. He looked at the general, at the soldiers standing at attention, at the entire impossible scene unfolding around him. He slowly, almost shakily, straightened his own stooped shoulders. General Matthews held his salute, his eyes locked on Arthur's. He then turned his head slightly, addressing not just the room but history itself. "For 50 years this man has been a ghost, a legend we tell our best soldiers about to inspire them. This is Captain Arthur Finch, commanding officer of the Special Operations Unit known as the Night Vipers." He paused, letting the weight of the name settle. Dr. Alistair Finch, the professor, let out an audible gasp. Lena, the waitress, stood frozen, her hand instinctively covering the tattoo on her other wrist. "In 1971, the general continued, his voice ringing with pride, Captain Finch and his unit of 12 men were sent on an impossible mission deep behind enemy lines. They were outnumbered 100 to 1, with no support and no chance of extraction. Their mission was to retrieve intelligence that would save an entire division from being annihilated in a planned ambush." He took a step closer to Arthur. "They were overrun. For 3 days they fought. The entire unit was declared lost, wiped out. But not before this man, Captain Finch, endured unimaginable hardship to ensure that intelligence made it out. He saved over 3,000 American lives that day. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, in absentia, because we believed him to be among the fallen. He was never a ghost to us, sir. He was a hero." The entire diner was silent, every eye fixed on the quiet, unassuming old man who had, moments before, been treated like a pariah. The air crackled with the sheer stunning power of the revelation. Lena began to weep silently, her eyes wide with a dawning impossible understanding. The crowd's faces, once filled with suspicion, were now masks of awe and shame. The general finally dropped his salute but kept his gaze on Arthur. Then his eyes shifted, moving with glacial slowness until they landed on Kyle. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were quiet, but each one landed like a hammer blow. "This man," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "sacrificed everything that you hold dear. His youth, his friends, his peace of mind. He has walked through hell so that you could have the luxury of standing here, in this peaceful country, in your cheap suit, and have the unmitigated gall to disrespect him." Kyle visibly shrank, his face draining of all color. He looked like a child who had been caught setting a fire. "You are a stain on the honor of this country," the general finished, his voice laced with a contempt so pure it was terrifying. He dismissed Kyle with a final withering look and turned back to Arthur. Arthur, however, wasn't looking at the general. His gaze was fixed on Lena, the waitress. He took a hesitant step toward her, his old eyes now clear and filled with a profound, questioning sadness. "The deepest wounds, son," he said softly, speaking to Kyle but looking at Lena, "are the ones no one can see." He then focused entirely on the young woman. "That mark on your wrist, the Night Viper," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandfather, was his name Marcus, Sergeant Marcus Jones, Vietnam, 1971. A rare moment of quiet in a makeshift jungle camp. The air is humid, smelling of wet earth and gunpowder. Two young men sit side by side, carving a piece of scavenged teakwood with a combat knife. One is a young, intense Arthur Finch. The other is the charismatic, steady Sergeant Marcus Jones. Marcus is carefully etching a coiled serpent with a single fang into the wood. "We carry this, we carry each other," Marcus says, his eyes focused on his work. "My kids will know this mark. My grandkids will know this mark. It means we never leave anyone behind. It's our promise." He hands the finished carving to Arthur. "Even when we're ghosts, this will be real." Lena's sob was now audible. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He was my grandfather," she whispered, her voice choked. "He died in the war. My grandmother told me he led a special team. She said he gave this to his best friend before he died." She held up her wrist, presenting the tattoo not as a piece of art but as an heirloom. "He said the night vipers never leave anyone behind." Arthur's composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. For 50 years he had been the sole survivor, the ghost carrying the weight of 12 good men. He thought he was the last. But he wasn't. The promise had survived. The legacy lived on, inked into the skin of a generation he never knew. He had found the last piece of his platoon. He had found his way home. In the weeks that followed, the story of the ghost of Da Nang and the Oakwood Diner became a national news item. The hotel corporation's parent company went into full damage control mode. Kyle was summarily fired, not just for the incident, but for the tidal wave of public outrage that followed. A formal public apology was issued to Arthur Finch. More substantially, the corporation announced a multi-million-dollar partnership with veteran support organizations and mandated company-wide sensitivity and respect training, with a curriculum designed in consultation with military family groups. The change was institutional, a direct result of the shame they had incurred. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, Arthur was sitting on a park bench, watching children play on a swing set. A hesitant figure approached him. It was Kyle, no longer in a suit, but in the simple uniform of a municipal parks worker, picking up trash with a grabber tool. He looked smaller, diminished. He stopped a respectful distance away, his face a mess of shame and regret. "Sir," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Finch, there's nothing I can say. I was arrogant, I was cruel, and I was wrong. I'm so sorry." Arthur looked at the young man for a long moment. He saw no anger, no satisfaction in his fall. He just saw a boy who had learned a hard lesson. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was an acknowledgement, a release, an act of grace. Kyle nodded back, tears welling in his eyes, and walked away without another word. The true epilogue, however, took place not in a boardroom or a park, but in a quiet corner of the very same diner. The new manager had insisted that Arthur Finch would eat there for free for the rest of his life. He sat in a booth, but he wasn't alone. Across from him sat Lena. Between them lay an old, cherished photo album. She pointed to a faded black and white picture of a handsome young soldier with a wide, confident smile. "This was him," she said softly. "Grandpa Marcus." Arthur looked at the photo of his friend, his brother, frozen in time. He then told Lena stories she had never heard. Stories of her grandfather's courage, his humor, his unshakable loyalty. He told her how Marcus had saved his life, how he had given him the leather wristband, how he had made him promise to live a life worthy of the sacrifice. In return, Lena told him about the family Marcus never got to meet, the legacy of strength he had passed down. For the first time in 50 years, Arthur Finch wasn't just remembering his platoon, he was sharing them. The ghosts were no longer just his burden to carry. They were a story to be told, a legacy to be honored. In the eyes of his brother's granddaughter, the last night viper had finally fulfilled his promise. He was no longer lost in the jungle, he was home. If this story of honor, legacy, and the promises we keep moved you, show your support by hitting that like button, sharing with someone who needs to see it, and subscribing to Veteran Valor for more stories that must be told. Thank you for watching.